I decided to do a little urban exploring to get my mind off my mother-in-law's cancer. She had been sick for half a decade, and it had made home life dreary. I was there for my wife, but there was only so much I could do, comfort her, as she was always one to deal with this stuff on her own. You can only get told to fuck off so many times before you start to take the advice. My wife liked company but preferred to grieve on her own as she felt it fostered self-sufficiency, whether I agreed or not. This did give me time to pursue my own hobbies, such as acting like exploring abandoned buildings like I was 15 again. I hopped over the rusted gate and ran into the decrepit building to avoid any chance of getting caught. I'm not sure why my interests became so morbid after her mum got ill. Maybe this was my subconscious way of coping. Perhaps my mother-in-law meant more to me than I realized. Whatever the reason, I had gotten past the point being afraid of anything and felt I had to keep upping the stakes of my explorations to keep myself from thinking too much. So on I went to use danger as a form of escapism. I was looking through rooms in order to find any freaky mysteries buried by the hospital to give this more of a video game vibe. I managed to break open what looked like an old chief of medicine's office. Just the normal stuff. Carved pentagrams, swastikas, insults, 666 and a bunch of other symbols that looked like they came from an 80s metal album. A bit disappointed, I decided to sit for a bit. Many of these buildings didn't scare me at all, and I needed a break as I came here straight from work and haven't had time to rest or eat. I've explored enough to know where the most important secrets in these places hide. It all came through the heart of the facility. Where the heart of the building was depended on the specific facility. Factories were a mystery due to the excessive number of nooks and crannies. Homes, despite their size, might have been worse. With schools and offices, you just had to search the right desk. But hospitals were always the chief of medicine's office. I guess there were too many unstable patients to put it anywhere else. Scrambling through files, I was about to just head home when I saw something interesting. I picked up a folder with the symbol of a circle and lines standing around it. I removed a document, and from what I read, there happened to be a special group in this hospital. A cult, I figured. There was a makeshift map on the back, which made me think there must have been something pretty cool in this room. I didn't find this in the trash. It was in a drawer I had to jimmy open, which told this might have been an urban explorer's dream come true. You learn fast what is useful. I took a map of the hospital and followed the instructions from the document, which led me to the 3rd floor, towards the end of the hallway. I made my way to the destination only to find a wall. Thinking the wall might be hollow, I began to punch and hit the wall with anything I could find. However, the wall was solid, with no sign of paint or anything that would imply something used to be here. That didn't stop me, as I have become an expert on finding hidden entrances. One of the reasons I brought the map was to navigate these hard-to-find areas. I figured the entrance to this room might have been on the other side near the stairwell. I went around to the stairs and found that the room on the other side of the building. There was a secret entrance on the side of the stairs opposite the hallway I was in. Wanting to feel the thrill of uncovering a cool conspiracy, I climbed in the entrance, hoping I might make a difference in this world. I found myself in a pitch-black room that smelled like a large janitor's closet. I searched around until I found a sign of light, or a breeze that could indicate a way out. I found a door and made my way out and found myself in what felt like a small gymnasium. I heard a small yelp and headed for the sound. I had been exploring so much that stuff that should have terrified me, such as screams or signs of crimes, only intrigued me and pushed me forward. I turned a corner to find a room with a small light in it. I shoved my way in like I've been there before. I saw a small group of people, some men and some women, who were surrounding a shaking patient. I wondered if I walked into one of those live procedures that med students would watch. For a brief moment, I thought I entered a part of the hospital that was still in operation and was about to leave when I noticed that the patient was awake. I yelped, causing the group to turn around. I started to run, but the door slammed shut with the leader standing right behind me. "You can't leave yet." "Please have a seat." As he turned to walk away, a seat materialized behind him. Not knowing what to do, I sat, hoping that if I cooperated, I wouldn't be in the patient's place. I could maybe leave and call the authorities. "I know what this looks like. You think we're monsters who are getting our rocks watching a man suffer. A cult of hedonists with no motive but smile in the face of another's pain." I assure you we're not monsters and we don't enjoy this. We have to do this. So you're addicted? The world depends on this man's suffering. I wanted to run for the hills, but thought I wouldn't get very far. I sat still, trying not to panic. I know it's crazy, but we have seen things. As bad as the world is, if we don't keep this man in pain, the chaos revealed will be so much worse. And it doesn't happen fast. It will be a gradual turn. It won't be an explosion, more like a corrosion. A steady stream of misevents that eventually leads to our destruction. Why do you think this? How does this work? I say, trying to stall as long as I can. It's difficult to explain, but every person, whether it be positive or negative, releases energy. The energy of an individual interacts with another's energy, which creates cohesion or friction that keeps the world in balance. This is why some people love each other, while some that can't stand a person. Every unlikable person, as well as every town favorite, serves a purpose. That being said, most people don't have enough energy to have a noticeable effect on their own. Their energy just comes off as normal human interaction, and the ones who are deemed more emotional and likable cause a small reaction and are mixed in the sea of energy created by every person. However, some people produce enough energy to really make difference. Cult leaders, dictators, and visionaries of all stripes can use that energy to control the wave of energy. This is, too, doesn't worry us, as most rarely ever discover their abilities, but a very rare few produces enough to affect the world, all on their own. For these people, their thoughts and opinions don't just carry more weight, but creates a force that doesn't require appealing to society's emotions. Their energy affects the abstract energy of others and create a domino effect of influence which can be mirrored by anyone without having any idea they are being influenced. It is almost like a possession. The ones who have the righteous religious status must be worshipped, while the ones who are malevolent must be despised, for this creates a balance of good and evil that keeps us a moral check. The ones who the most energy is not able to control it. It must be controlled for them. This is David Eklund. He is what we call a negative unified force. His torture brings stability that we otherwise wouldn't have. What stability? The world is in chaos. If this were real, I think you guys found the wrong person. The level of chaos we'd have without this man's pain would be astounding. You think the political chaos is bad now? Imagine riots that can actually bring down countries. Imagine what comes up after is basically a black hole that just destroys. No one would believe in anything anymore. Everything would be about trying to destroy. What we have now is not chaos. How do you know this? This is ready. We've all had experiences with our doubt. This wouldn't just happen all at once. It always starts out with a relatively small incident. Maybe someone gets shot. Maybe his family or friends take exception to that and attempt revenge. Maybe that retaliation hits the wrong person, causing a political group to think it was a hate crime, which in turn causes a bit of protests, which causes an extremist group to act out, leading to riots from the protesters. Maybe the protesters get careless and injure a general in the crowd. Maybe this causes the police and military to get involved. This chaos would be much worse than what we've experienced the last few decades. This is a huge claim. Come on, we aren't monsters. We've all wanted this man to be free, but have experienced some of these mild calamities. There just isn't a way around it. I don't know. I hear a woman interject. I came here 2 years ago. I rescued him and took him to a shelter. I got a call from my mother that my sister had been committed. My sister has always had problems, so I figured it was a coincidence. My sister tried to eat one of the nurses, and she didn't make it. So my sister was put on trial. She originally got a light sentence due to her mental state, but was changed to the death penalty the next day. We were all confused at the sudden change of heart, but the judge wouldn't hear it. He said this cultish behavior has to stop. They put her to death the next week. This made my sister's case the fastest execution in modern US history. This caused an extremist church to bomb the state house, which caused a far-left group to react and shoot the pastor of their church. This the first time I've heard about political violence in my city, and the groups are normally on the opposite side of this issue. My town started splitting up into factions, and I began to feel like I was in an actual civil conflict. I remembered what this group had told me and decided to give their theory a try. I found Dave and promised him a meal at my place. I drugged him, put him in car, and brought him back here. The next couple days I saw both groups disband. People in the town lose interest their factionalism, and my sister's sentence was cleared as a mistrial. My family was awarded $500,000 for the mistake. Maybe it was naive, but I became a believer pretty quick, and even more so once I saw what happened when the others went through similar trials. So you are a part of this now? That's part of the deal. You make the choice, then you torture him. I torture him mentally. He thinks I'm his lover, who's also a prisoner, and every few months I make him think we're escaping only to bring him back here. I hate it, but using my energy to keep his in check is now my biggest priority. But the leader chimes in, and now you're a part of it as well. You have seen him, and whether you like it or not, must partake in his torture. Now come, you need to take in your duty. He grabbed my hand and pulled me to what appeared to be an aberration made by the art department of The Exorcist. He was bloody, pale, and missing teeth. His hair was mangy and missing clumps. The man wasn't even shaking. It was like he felt reserved to his fate. Now please, make the choice. How will you torture him? How will you utilize your negative spirit? We'll give you 20 minutes. The group walks into a side door and leaves me to my decision. I wasn't about to get inducted in this cult. I didn't care if I were risking my life. I needed to save a human from a fate worse than death. I grabbed the knife off the table, cut his ropes, and tried to pull him up. Come on, I'm getting you out of here. The man could barely stand after being tied up for so long, and I had to act as a crutch. We made our way to the door I came from. I had to be cautious as I wasn't sure if the cult had backup in the hallway I came from. I peeked out and noticed a couple robed members at the end of the hall. They were hard to make out in the dark, but I could see them, and luckily, they were on the opposite side I came from, so I shuffled with this dude toward our exit. I was curious as to why their security was this lax, considering the nature of their crimes. I guess entropy really takes its toll. We made our way in the stairwell to the main hospital where we sat for a few minutes. How long have you been in here? I don't know. He seemed listless. I couldn't blame him. Are you from this area? I'm not sure. I've been here for years. I barely remember what happened the day I was taken. I don't have much a grasp on time anymore. These guys really do this to you all these years? It's been rough. It hasn't all been brutal. Sometimes I get a week off to recover, but I think that's so I can feel the pain fresher. They pretend to be my friend, then crack me a bunch, then I wake back on the table. We sat there for 30 minutes just talking about his situation and where he wants to go. I received a text from my wife. Her mum's health took a turn for the worse. She wasn't texting like she normally did. She told me she might take her own life. Just as I was about to message her, my brother texted me about how most of the houses on his block are foreclosing and his neighbors are becoming homeless. His house is safe, but people are demanding to stay there. He is contemplating leaving as the neighborhood is becoming chaotic. At this point, my anxiety had gone to overdrive. I'm not superstitious, but the coincidence was ridiculous. Come on, let's get a move on. I helped him up when I got a ping on my phone. My wife tried to kill herself. It was then that superstition took hold. But this guy isn't getting tortured because my family is in pain. I couldn't do that to anyone, no matter the cost. If this thing was real, I'll just kill myself. I took us through the hole that led back to the main hospital when I received another text. My brother got stabbed by his wife. This was understandable. She was stressed. We were walking in the hallway that led to the exit, and I got a text from my wife's sister. My wife, apparently, had a contagious blood disease that had begun to infect the hospital. Their family was quarantined. Hey, wait, there was odd security. Let's go back this way. I had taken the dude back to the room. The cult was standing there waiting. You were quicker than most. Most people spend at least another 20 minutes pretending they're going to save him while they make up their mind. Shut up, this is horrific. We've all had to make the decision. It cannot continue if a newcomer doesn't make the choice. The members pull the fella up and tie him. Now, you must make the next move. He hands me a knife. The first cut must be the most painful. It wasn't entirely uncommon to see various stores come and go along our local strip mall. In fact, I recall purchasing a grill from Armstrong's Hardware in the same building that had been a Chinese buffet only a month prior. The stores came and they went, a tale of another family unable to make ends meet. Not much changed around the Oakfield area outside of the carousel of businesses. The local skate park remained dead, and the bowling alley had become a hotspot for purchasing shitty weed and laced coke. School numbers had remained on the decline since the turn of the century, as families filed out one after the other. Anyways, I suppose that's a good enough history lesson on the quaint town of Oakfield, Illinois. A once promising city that would be lucky to be classified as a village now. Here I am, once a man, lucky to be classified as a bum now. I'd made a decent living and a good name for myself during my tenure at the Oakfield Cafe. The food wasn't necessarily fancy, but that's okay. It brought the town comfort, good old-fashioned soul food. However, things took a turn during COVID, and we were forced to shut the place down. I've been unable to hold down anything ever since, outside of the occasional freelance job. The morning I happened upon Riley's Fungin had been like many which had come before it. In fact, it had seemed markedly better. The air was cool and crisp. The fall was easing in and washing out the heat of a long, dry summer. A perfect day for some job hunting. My parents had always told me that it's better to apply in person than online, so that's exactly what I did. I threw on my cleanest white shirt, all the others had paint stains from previous jobs, and a pair of blue jeans, and out I went. I had been actively avoiding applying at the bowling alley, so I decided to see if any new stores popped up at the strip mall since my last visit. My beat-up old Civic bounced and lurched along the decaying roads, fighting the monstrous potholes along the entrance of the mall's parking lot. In total, the row of buildings could house 5 stores, though it seemed one of them always remained vacant. Starting from the left was the longest tenured of the 5, a laundromat which never seemed to have an employee present. No dice. Next to that was Blue's Supermarket, which probably accounted for 90% of the traffic in the mall. Unfortunately, I'd already applied there at least half a dozen times and had yet to hear anything back. Might be worth another shot. Then, right there in the middle was exactly what I'd hoped for. A new store, a new possibility for employment. Riley's Fungin, the scarlet-colored sign read. Weird name, but it was worth a shot. The door to my Civic squealed in protest as I pushed it open and slid out. I peered up at the sign with the funny name again, before pushing the door shut and making my way to the building. I wish I could say that I had felt some sort of the ominous foreboding as I walked up to Riley's Fungin, but rather it was a sort of cautious optimism. Truthfully, I felt great, like I'd already got the job offer and my financial burdens would soon be a thing of the past. Those dreams were promptly crumbled up and shot into outer space as soon as I made my way inside. A Victorian-esque couch, the color of crimson, sat lonely in the middle of the vacant room. Several lamps, which hung from the wall, cast a golden hue over the dark wooden floors. The darkness seemed absolute outside of the lamp's glow. All the windows were shrouded by curtains which matched the couch's red hue. As odd as it all seemed, it was somewhat comforting. My footsteps fell especially loudly in the empty room. This may sound weird, but at that moment I was sure that I was the only soul in the room. As I came closer to the red couch, I noticed a short mahogany desk sat directly in front of it. Its top was no more than a foot above the floor. A metal box stood in the middle of the desk, with a yellow button protruding from the top. "Hello?" My voice echoed much like my footsteps had. Nobody answered. Against any rational judgment, I decided to take a seat. Almost instantly, 2 more lamps directly in front of me turned on, revealing a chalkboard. In perfect cursive it read, "Welcome to Riley's Fungin. Where your wish is our command. Ask the box anything and press the button. Remember, it all comes with a price." The creeps had thoroughly settled in by this point. My heart had begun pounding furiously. What did any of it mean? Anything? I mean, really, anything? I sat dumbfounded on that couch for a while, reading its message repeatedly. It all comes with a price, I thought, all too aware of the empty wallet sitting in my pocket, though even then I had a feeling that wasn't the kind of price it meant. "Hello?" I called out once more, hoping anybody would come clarify what this all meant. Obviously it couldn't be real. This had to be some sort of gag store for some asshole's YouTube channel or TikTok. I looked around the room again, studying the shadows between the lamp's glow. No matter how long I looked into those shadows, no matter how long I let my eyes adjust to that darkness, they couldn't seem to penetrate through that pitch black. I shifted in my seat, suddenly aware of the fact that I was sitting alone in a dark room of a place called Riley's Function. Maybe people in horror movies aren't as dumb as people make them out to be. Or maybe I'm just the perfect person to play such a role. Once again, against any rational thought, I decided to press the button. As my finger lifted from the glowing button, I went still, expecting someone or something to emerge from the shadows and either snatch me up or laugh and scream that I had just been pranked. Neither happened. I returned my gaze to the chalkboard. "Ask the box anything," it said. As greedy as this makes me sound, it took little time for me to decide on my wish. Rent wasn't going to pay itself. "I need $800, please," I said. At first, nothing happened. I sat there feeling like an idiot, getting ready to hop up from the couch and continue my job search elsewhere. Then, from one of those inky shadows in the corner of the room, I could hear the squeal of a door on its rusted hinges. I froze. A tall, slender figure began to materialize through the darkness. I wanted to bolt so badly, but it felt as though my body was frozen in time. A man, or what I assume was a man, emerged from the shadows. He was adorned in a black suit with matching black pants. He wore a mask over his face, a mask which looked like it was straight from a Victorian masquerade party. The mask had a long, skinny nose and no mouth. Its eyes appeared to be sewn shut. In his hand was a large silver platter with a dome concealing its contents. He walked swiftly and without hesitation. At once, he stood directly over me, his gaze never meeting my own. He lifted the platter's sparkling dome. Upon it were 8 perfect stacks of $100 bills and a razor. As my shaky hands drew near my prospective rent funds, the man raised his hand like a cross guard trying to stop a car. Instead, he lifted the razor. I looked at the razor and then at him, though he seemed to be fixated on something beyond me. "What do I do with it?" I asked, cringing at the weakness of my cracking voice. I turned my gaze back to the chalkboard, which revealed a new message. "Shave one of your eyebrows off," it said. "That's it?" I asked the man, though I was sure he wouldn't answer. If I had to walk around for a month or so looking like an idiot, at least I'd have an apartment to hide in the meantime. I plucked the razor from his gloved hand and promptly erased my eyebrows. I set the razor back on the platter when I was done and scooped up the stacks of bills. My feet were unsteady as I walked haphazardly to the door, looking back one more time before thanking the silent man and leaving. Rent was paid on time that month. My insides felt slimy and sick for a while after using the services of Riley's Function, though I wish I could say that feeling had stopped me from ever returning. Over the following months I had returned for various things, ranging from more help with my financial burdens or the occasional steak dinners. All of the requests had remained fairly innocent. Once I had to shave my entire head bald. Another time they made me flip my eyelids open, though sometimes they were a bit more ominous. Once I had to smash one of my fingers with a hammer, which had broken it, though the money I got was able to pay for a doctor's visit and more. They'd also made me pull one of my teeth after I requested a little help in the dating scene, but it was more than worth it after my recent influx of female visitors. Truthfully, life was good, but as it was programmed in my lizard brain, humans simply cannot let a good thing be. I figured if I got one big lump sum that I would never have to return to the Function, but I had to be smart, I had to be. If I asked for $1 million, could you imagine what horrible shit they'd make me do? I couldn't let that happen. I needed help. The trees were barren at this point, and a thin layer of sleet had taken up residence on the sidewalk leading to my grandmother's home. She was more than excited to see her seldom present grandson knocking at the front door. Without hesitation, she allowed me in. By the time I explained to her what Riley's Function was all about, I felt a little guilty. I mean, I couldn't be the one taking that sort of punishment, you know. Besides, she wasn't going to be around for much longer anyways. After pleading with her for what felt like eternity, I'm surprised she didn't die of old age by how long that conversation took, though she finally agreed to join me on a visit to the place, none the wiser, of course. Perhaps it's that dementia-riddled part of their brain that steals any sort of reasoning. Truly, had anyone else heard the ridiculous shit I was spewing, they'd have me thrown in the loony bin. But not my Meemaw. No, sir. She was just as eager as I was to sit on that crimson couch as I was. "So, how do I do this?" she croaked, looking around suspiciously at the shadows surrounding us. I nudged at her ribs and pointed at the button. "Just press that and say what I told you," I spat, but added gently, "Just think of what we can do with all that money." She smiled at me, a worn, wrinkly smile. She reached a frail hand out to the button and pressed it. "Yes, I would like—" She trailed off, a worried look spreading over her ragged face. "I would like $5 million. I cringed at how foolish she sounded, how unaware she was at the power this place held. Suddenly she slumped over and began to convulse. I jumped up. "What the fuck?" I yelped, peering over at the chalkboard. Scribbled on the board were two simple words. "Kill him." When I returned my gaze to my grandma, she had vanished. The room was entirely still, entirely silent. I stood there for a minute, then two, before something in the shadows had caught my eye, something horrible, something grisly. Its limbs bent and twisted at terrible, awkward angles, cracking and popping as the creature drew closer to me. It moved slowly, watching me from the perfect shroud of darkness. Then, like a bolt of lightning, it climbed to the heavens, skittering with amazing speed along the ceiling. My legs began buckling as I tried helplessly to get away from the thing. I fell to my knees and called out for my grandma, calling for help, for anyone to save me from this monster. Then, from the darkness overhead, emerged a knobby, veined hand with a wedding ring on one of its twisted fingers. "Don't worry, I'm here," my grandma's voice called from the darkness. Then, from the pool of black, her face emerged. Her jaw hung limp, revealing a gaping mouth filled with rows upon rows of needle-sharp teeth. Its eyes were pulled back into huge black ovals like a cartoonish depiction of an alien. Beyond those rows of teeth emanated the smell of 1,000 corpses. At this, a surge of adrenaline brought my gelatinous legs back to life as I pushed my way back out into the world, back to my apartment. I'm not sure how long I've been held up here since the day the Fungeon turned my grandma into an otherworldly creature. Weeks, months, maybe. Every time I think of leaving the house, I can hear something skittering just outside my window, just outside my sight. I can hear her sometimes, but she only ever says the same thing. Everything comes with a price. Have you ever had the feeling that you're being watched, like eyes are prying into you, trying to dig their way deep into your soul? Because that's how I've felt for the past 2 days. I don't know what to do, or how I can make it stop. I've never posted on something like this before, but at this point I'm willing to try anything. I'm desperate for some advice. I'll take you back to the start, or what I assume to be the start of it all. I live a fairly ordinary life. I'm a 21-year-old guy, living on his own in a bit of a rundown flat, commuting to work on the train every day. This doesn't leave me a lot of spare time for anything else, really, because my commute is an hour each way. My days consist of waking up at 6:30, getting dressed, walking to the train station, catching the train, walking to work, working, and then doing the same process in reverse. That's it. I don't really have any friends to hang out with, and I'm not exactly on the best terms with my family, for reasons I won't go into here. So I sit on my own each evening, watching TV or playing video games. I keep myself to myself and get on with my life. Now you may be thinking that my life sounds pretty miserable or boring, but to me it's perfect. I've always been a bit of a loner, so my daily routine suits me perfectly, and I've been living happily like this for the past year. That is, until a dream I had 3 nights ago. Like all dreams, it didn't have a beginning. I was simply there, no recollection of opening my eyes in this new place, or how I'd got there. I was standing in the middle of a large grassy field. I could feel the wind blowing gently on my face, and I ran my hand through the large grass strands that stretched up from the ground to meet me. I looked around and realized I was alone. The field was empty, save for a lone tree a few hundred feet away from me. I started to make my way over to it, not knowing why I was doing so. but just having the feeling that there was something there I needed to see. As I got closer, I could make out the faint shape of letters carved into the wood. From where I was standing, I couldn't quite make out what they were, and so I decided to get closer for a better look. And that's when I felt it for the first time. Even in my dream, the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, and a chill went down my spine. I could tell that I was no longer alone. Someone else was here watching me. I span myself around and caught the first glimpse of them. They were far away, so far away that all of their features were obscured by the distance. All I could make out was a featureless shadow, standing in the grass, watching me. I stood for what seemed like hours, just staring back at them, unsure of what to do. And then they started to run. The figure lurched forwards with impossible speed, heading straight for me. Instinctively, I span back around and began to take off in the opposite direction, towards the tree. The words on the tree were becoming clearer, but I still couldn't make out what they were yet. As I ran through the grass, trying desperately not to trip on the uneven terrain, I glanced behind me to ascertain how much distance I had left between me and my pursuer. Not much. It had impossible speed, coming at me like a steam train, closing the gap between us in a matter of seconds. It would only be a few more until it was on me. I began to panic and tried to pick up my pace, but as is the curse of most dreams, I was running at a snail's pace. My foot slipped and I was sent crashing to the ground. I flipped over just in time to see my pursuer pouncing on top of me. I could see now that it was not the distance that had caused it to look featureless. It was featureless. Just a black hole of pure energy in the shape of a person. It brought its hands up to my face, placing them on either side of my eyes. I began to cry and plead with it, begging it not to hurt me. It didn't listen. Instead, it plunged its dark thumbs into my eye sockets, blocking my vision and causing me to scream out in pain. And then I was awake, screaming still. I scanned my room, looking for the creature, but I was alone. Fucking stupid nightmare, I muttered to myself as I led back down, trying to slow my breathing and calm myself down. I managed to eventually get back to sleep and awoke at 6:30 to my normal alarm buzzing next to me. I got up and began to get ready for work as normal, when my mind drifted back to my nightmare. I tried to think of the letters I had seen carved into the wood of the tree, but all I could remember were Eramec nonixim noenis. There was still a lot more carved into it, but in my panic I couldn't make out the rest. Whatever, I thought to myself. I left my building and began my walk to the train station, the thoughts of my dream already beginning to fade from my memory, chalked up to nothing more than a stupid dream caused by a scary video game or something. You'd be surprised by how quiet the streets are in a big town at 7 a.m. No one trying to sell you things, no one bumping into you or pushing past. Most of the time it's just me and the road, nice and quiet. It was the same on Thursday morning, but as I got closer to the train station, I began to get a familiar feeling. The hairs on the back of my neck began to stand up, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I turned around slowly, hoping to just see another commuter making their way to work behind me. The street was still clear, with no sign of anyone else having been there other than me. I breathed a sigh of relief and shook my head, thinking that the previous night's dream was just playing tricks on my mind. However, as I began to turn my head back in the direction I was traveling, my eyes caught a glimpse of someone standing behind a lamppost. Only half of their body was visible, the other half hidden behind the metal pole. They were standing about 200 meters from me, so I couldn't easily make out any of their features. All I could see was an eye glistening in the reflection of the streetlight. Whoever it was watching me, motionless. I stood for a moment, debating what to do. I brought my hands up to my face and momentarily covered my eyes as I rubbed them. When I removed my hands once more, the figure was gone. I let out a faint laugh, cursing myself for being so stupid as to believe someone was watching me. It was most likely just someone making their way to work, just like me. They had momentarily stopped to look at me, the only other person on the street, just as I had done to them. And then they had moved on, got on with their day, just as I had to do now as well. The rest of the day went by as usual, with nothing out of the ordinary to report. That is, until I was on the way home. I got on the train home as I normally would, and we set off back towards my hometown. There are a number of stops between where the train begins and where it ends. with the carriages steadily becoming quieter and quieter as the journey progresses. By the time it reaches the final stop, I am normally the only person left in the carriage, which I am more than okay with, as it means no one has to sit next to me. As the train slowed to ready itself for the next station, I felt my hairs stand on end once more. I sighed at myself. Not again, I thought, wishing that my brain would stop playing tricks on me. It was clearly hanging on to the dream more than I had thought, and was not letting not go any time soon. The train slowed to a halt, and the doors hissed open to allow any passengers to get off. It was a quiet station in the evening, and so the platform was deserted, save for the shape of a lone person standing at the far end of the platform. It had been raining, and so my window was covered in thin streams of water, obscuring the figure and making it seem as though they were a strange shape, almost as if you were looking at yourself in a funhouse mirror. Their body seemed twisted and deformed, no longer even resembling the shape of a human. The thought of it sent more chills down my spine, and as the doors hissed shut and the train pulled off, I silently thanked the gods that we weren't delayed. When I climbed into bed that night, I prayed that my brain wouldn't force me to experience another one of its concoctions, and that I would just be able to forget the whole thing had ever happened. But my mind, once again, had other plans. I was standing in the middle of a crowded street, streams of people passing around me. I glanced down and found that I was dressed in my work clothes, consisting of a shirt, tie, and smart pants. I felt at the tie and let it slip through my fingers. The silk felt so real. I looked back up to the street and found myself surrounded by staring faces. Everyone had stopped what they were doing and was staring at me, their mouths hanging slightly open in a look of shock and awe. And when I say everyone, I mean everyone. All those sat in coffee shops, in the flats above me, and in cars all stared at me through the glass of their windows, the same expressions resting on their faces. They were unmoving, unbreathing, unfeeling. All emission had drained from them, as though they were statues. And then as one, they took a step closer. Faces squished against the windows as those inside the buildings tried to get closer, seemingly unaware there was something in the way. I began to panic as the space between me and the crowd lessened as they moved closer once more. They were a single organism, moving together as though the individual bodies were simply limbs controlled by one malevolent force. There was now only a meter between me and the nearest person, and this gap was closed before I was able to react. I felt hands grabbing at me, ripping my shirt, grasping my tie and pulling it, tightening its grip around my throat and cutting off my oxygen supply. "Please, stop," I choked, pushing and shoving at the mass of bodies, desperate to get them away. I was met with a deafening reply, as every mouth began chanting the same thing. My memory of what they were saying is pretty hazy, but from what I can remember, it sounded something like, "Ui mae, emera ui." The voices were dark, inhuman. I felt as though my eardrums would burst at the volume of the chanting, the vibrations reverberating through my body. I was being crushed from all sides, my clothes being ripped off, my skin being ripped at and scratched by unrelenting hands. I cried out in pain, and as with the previous night, I was awake, still screaming. I looked at my hands and found that I was shaking. My ears were ringing, as though they had been exposed to a high volume in the night. I picked up my phone and checked the time, 5:47. Screw it, I thought to myself. There wasn't a chance I was going back to sleep after that. I climbed out of bed and walked to my bathroom. I splashed cold water onto my face in an attempt to wake myself up and make me think rationally about the situation. All that had really happened was I had had a couple of bad dreams and seen two people obscured by various things. That was it. Nothing unnatural about that. I breathed slower now, the rational side of my brain slowly beginning to take hold. As I brought my head back up to look at myself in the mirror, I noticed a shadow standing in my shower, obscured by the shower curtain that had been pulled across. I gasped, and my blood ran cold. I was frozen by fear as I stared into the reflection. Whoever was in the shower was facing the mirror as well, their shape clearly visible. They were unmoving, as still as a statue. I slowly turned myself around to face the curtain, the shape of the intruder still visible. Tears began to form in my eyes as I reached out a hand. I grasped the fabric, and in one quick motion yanked the curtain across to expose the figure. It was empty. I let out an audible mix of relief and fear as I brought my shaking hands up to my head. I went into work early that day. I couldn't really focus properly on what I was doing, my mind filled with thoughts of my follower. Whatever it wasn't a figment of my imagination. I had definitely seen a figure standing in my bathroom, watching me. It had been in my flat, feet away from me. I traveled home as usual, thankfully not having the feeling I was being watched at all. I stepped off the train onto the platform and followed the few others that had got off down the nearby stairs that led to the exit. The stairs lead down to a small tunnel under the station, lit by crappy lights that flicker occasionally. At the end of the tunnel is a corner where a set of stairs live, leading up to the entrance of the station. Next to this corner is a mirror, placed onto the wall near the ceiling, allowing you to see if anyone is about to turn the corner, preventing you from bumping into them. As I neared the corner, I glanced up at the mirror and found that there was someone standing just round it. They were wearing a shirt that seemed to be 2 sizes too small for them, and a tie that looked as though it was choking them. A mass of lumpy skin bulged through the gaps between the shirt's buttons. I stopped in my tracks just before the corner. I looked into the mirror closer, and even though they were hunched over, I could see that the person's head was deformed, as though it was just piles of skin thrown together clumsily. I could hear it wheezing, as if the simple act of breathing was causing it immense pain. I could feel tears beginning to well in my eyes again as I felt my hairs stand on end once more. Shit, I whispered to myself, trying to hype myself up just enough to make the 3 steps to the turn. Every part of my body wanted to turn around and run in the opposite direction, but I resisted. I was startled by a shout from behind me and turned around to see the cause, only to find a group of kids running down the steps, cheering and joking with each other. I turned back to face the mirror and found that the figure was gone again. Just like in the morning, I took a few shaky steps forward and turned the corner, confirming that there was no one there. And then last night I had the worst dream yet. I found myself standing back in my bathroom, brushing my teeth. I could taste the mint of the toothpaste as I brushed, spitting out the foam into the sink below. I brought my head back up and stared at myself in the mirror. I was met with a twisted, deformed version of myself, smiling maniacally at me. I stepped backwards, and he stepped forwards, his head protruding from the glass as though it were an open window. A crooked, broken hand reached up onto the frame, and in one smooth motion, the body slithered out, pulling itself through. It flopped onto the sink, smacking its head onto the porcelain and causing it to bleed. I fell backwards as I retreated, stumbling into the bathtub. I sat and watched in horror as the being got to its feet, the bones cracking as it twisted, its broken body around to face me. The mirror me continued to smile as he began to move towards me. At this point, I was paralyzed with fear as he began the same chant as the previous night. "Ui ma'e em era ui, ui ma'e em era ui." Please don't hurt me," I cried as the shaking, twisted hands reached out towards my face. I turned my face away from the creature and braced myself for the inevitable. When I opened them again, I was back in my bed. My breathing was heavy and my head hurt. I groaned as I sat up. I raised my hand and rested it on my forehead, trying to nurse the pain. When I made contact with my skin, I found that I was covered in something sticky. I pulled my hand away and grabbed my phone, shining the torch onto my palm. It was covered in blood. I felt my forehead again and could feel a deep cut in the flesh. I winced in pain as I touched it and realized that the wound was extremely fresh. I tried my best to clean the wound in the bathroom and wrapped a bandage from my first aid kit around my head. In the hallway outside my flat, the lights are controlled by a movement sensor. It's pretty bad and only stays on for a few seconds, even if you keep moving. As I walk back to my bedroom, I notice that the light is on outside. I walk up to the door and double-check the lock. The light goes off as I get nearer, but as I turn away from the door, I see it switch back on, the light glowing under the door. I move back into my bedroom and open my laptop. That is where I am now, writing this, asking for help. I don't know what to do, or how I can stop this. All I know is that whatever is following me, it's getting closer, more confident. I know it is outside my door. The hair on the back of my neck is on end. When I was 8 years old, my family moved from a noisy city to a quiet town in the countryside. My dad had gotten a job at a big nuclear power plant there, and we all had to move. The plant was huge, standing like a giant, with smoke coming out of its tall chimneys. The houses around it seemed small, as if someone built them in a rush, like they forgot that people working at the plant would need a place to live. We lived on Strand Street, near Building A of the plant. I still remember the day we moved. As we got closer to the plant, I felt the air get heavy, almost like a thick blanket was placed over me. When I took a breath, it tasted strange, like chemicals. I rolled up my window, trying to keep that weird taste out. The sun was setting, and the sky was turning orange. We had been packing all day and were finally driving into town, but it was strange. No one was around. The streets were empty, and I couldn't see any lights in the houses. I pressed my face against the car window, trying to look inside the houses, but every window was covered with curtains or blinds. It felt like no one was home. My mum, who could always tell what I was thinking, turned around and smiled. "I'm sure there are lots of kids on our street, Charlie," she said, holding my hand. I tried to smile back, though I wasn't sure I believed her. "There's our house," my dad said excitedly, pointing to a small brick house at the end of the street. He parked the car on the narrow road, and as he did, I noticed a man and a woman walking by quickly, holding grey shopping bags. They kept looking behind them, like they were being followed. When they got to a house a few doors down from ours, the woman sighed with relief. She pointed at us and whispered something to the man. He glanced at my parents, who were busy unpacking the car, with a worried look on his face. I stepped out of the car and stood next to my dad as he shook the man's hand. My dad was the type of person who could talk to anyone, even if they didn't seem like they wanted to talk. The man's name was Mr. Grieg, and he looked nervous. He kept glancing around like he was expecting something bad to happen. His wife, Mrs. Grieg, stood nearby, twisting her hands. While they were talking, I heard a tap on the Griegs' window. I looked over and saw a boy about my age peeking through the thick curtains. He grinned at me, showing a missing front tooth. Then, just as quickly, he disappeared from the window, and a moment later, I heard footsteps rushing down the street. The boy ran right up to me and almost knocked me over. "I'm Toby," he said excitedly, barely giving me a chance to say my name. He immediately started talking about the book I was holding and asked if I had read the scary part yet. He talked so fast that I could hardly keep up. Toby's parents looked even more nervous now, and my mum gently told Toby and me to go inside and explore the house while the adults continued talking. As we walked inside, Toby kept chatting, his voice echoing around the empty rooms. I looked back to see the Griegs speaking quietly to my parents. My dad wasn't smiling anymore, and both my parents now had the same worried look I had seen on Toby's parents. The move was a big change for me. There were things I liked, like having my own room. Our old apartment in the city had been small, and now I had more space to play. I also liked knowing that I would start at my new school with Toby by my side in September. But some things were harder to get used to. Toby and I would play outside for hours, running around or kicking a ball. But every evening, when the sun began to set, our mums would call us inside. Toby's mum, Mrs. Grieg, was always quick to call him, as if she was waiting by the door for the exact moment the sun disappeared. Toby didn't seem to mind. He would roll his eyes, smile at me, and run back to his house. For me, it was strange. In the city, I could play outside until it got dark, and my mum wouldn't worry. But here, she seemed scared. She would watch me walk the short distance to our house, and only relax when I was inside. My dad would come home a little while later, walking with Mr. Grieg from the plant. He would lock the door behind him, and we'd close all the curtains before sitting down for dinner. The plant's humming was always in the background. Weeks passed, and I got used to our new routine. But one thing that still bothered me was the noise from the plant. Some days it was just a low hum, but on other days it made this awful screeching sound that shook the ground beneath us. I told Toby about it one day while we were playing. He held his hand up to his ear and said, "Oh yeah, I guess I don't hear it anymore. You get used to it after a while." "I don't know how you can get used to something that loud," I said. Toby thought for a moment and then, in a quiet voice, said, "Well, there is one place where you can't hear it at all." That caught my attention. "Really? Where?" I asked eagerly. "It's kind of far," Toby said, but he could already see that I was excited. I hadn't explored much beyond our street, and I was itching to see more. Toby checked his watch and looked up at the sky. "We still have time," he decided. "Let's go." We started running, with Toby leading the way. After a while, the paved road turned into a path, with grass growing through the cracks. The air felt fresher, and the heavy feeling I always had near the plant started to fade. I could breathe more easily. "There it is," Toby said proudly. We had reached a clearing surrounded by trees. The grass was soft and green, and colorful flowers were scattered around. A small stream flowed through the clearing, and a brick bridge stood over it. The place was so peaceful, like it was from another world. I couldn't believe how different it was from the grey streets back home. And just like Toby said, it was quiet. The noise from the plant was completely gone. All I could hear was the sound of the stream and the wind rustling through the trees. "It's nice here, isn't it?" Toby asked, smiling. "It's amazing," I said. I wanted to stay there forever. We spent the rest of the day playing, picking flowers, climbing trees, and throwing sticks into the stream to see whose would float the farthest. I felt free, like the worries of the town and the plant couldn't reach me here. But then I noticed the sun was starting to set. "We should go," I said, suddenly feeling anxious. Toby looked disappointed, but he nodded. "Yeah, our parents will be mad if we're late." Reluctantly, we left the clearing and headed back. But as we walked, the sky grew darker. The trees, which had looked so beautiful before, now seemed scary, their branches stretched out like long fingers, blocking the fading light. Then we heard it, a rustling sound behind us. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but it grew louder, like something was following us. Toby squeezed my hand and whispered, "Let's run." We took off, running as fast as we could, but whatever was behind us started moving faster too. It was getting closer. I could hear its footsteps, heavy and fast. My heart was pounding and I was terrified. Suddenly, a horrible screech filled the air. It was so loud and awful that it made my ears ring. I felt my legs buckle beneath me, and I tripped, falling hard on the pavement. Something thick and black began to spread out around me. It looked like tar, but it was alive, moving like it was chasing me. I tried to get up, but my legs were stuck. "Toby!" I screamed, but Toby was already pulling me, trying to get me free. The black tar was burning my skin, and I could feel it creeping up my legs. Then I saw it, the creature. It was massive, crawling toward us, its body twisted in ways that didn't seem natural, and it made these horrible clicking noises as it moved. Just as the tar reached my knees, Toby gave one last pull, and I was free. We ran for our lives, not stopping until we reached the front door of my house. My parents slammed the door shut, bolting it as the creature threw itself against it. The door shook with each hit, but it held. After what felt like forever, the banging stopped, and the creature was gone. Inside, I looked down at my legs and saw that the skin had melted off in places. My legs were raw and bleeding. Toby, who had been so brave, started to cry. Mrs. Grieg cleaned my wounds, her hands steady and calm, like she had done this before. I tried not to look at the mess the tar had made of my legs, but it was hard to ignore the pain. Later that night, we learned that Mr. Grieg had gone out to look for us when we were late getting home. He hadn't come back. Life after that night wasn't the same. Toby and I didn't play outside anymore. Our parents were more cautious, always watching the sky, the clock, and each other. We only saw the Griegs occasionally. When I did see Toby, he was always close to his mom, looking like he was still shaken from what happened. Even though we lived in the same town, Toby and I grew apart. I think it was because we both felt guilty. Guilty for going to the clearing, guilty for what happened to his dad, and guilty for not being able to stop it. The carefree days of playing in the street were gone. My legs eventually healed, but the scars never fully went away. They turned from an angry red to a pale pink, always reminding me of that night and the black tar that almost took me. My mum bought me long pants to wear to school so no one could see the scars. But even with the scars hidden, the memories were still fresh. The town moved on, just like it always did. The plant kept running, the smoke still rising from its chimneys. People went to work, came home, and locked their doors at night. But in our house, there was a new tension. My parents argued more. They waited until they thought I was asleep, but I could hear them through the walls. My mum would bring up that night, shouting at my dad about what happened to Mr. Grieg and the burns on my legs. One night, things got especially bad. My mum was yelling, saying that living here wasn't worth it. I curled up in bed, holding my old teddy bear tight against my chest, even though I was much too old for it. The argument got louder, and I heard the front door slam. I crept down the stairs and found my dad standing in the hallway, staring at the open door. "She's gone," he whispered, not looking at me. My heart raced. My mum had gone outside. At night. The thing from the alley was out there and she was alone. I didn't think twice. I grabbed my coat and ran out the door. It was pitch black outside. The streetlights flickered, casting weak beams of light that barely cut through the darkness. I was about to call for my mum when I heard another door slam. "Charlie!" It was Toby. He was standing on his porch, his face pale in the dim light. "Toby, my mum, she's gone," I said, trying to catch my breath. "She went outside, down there." Toby's face tightened with fear, but he didn't hesitate. "I'll come with you," he said, stepping off the porch. We walked side by side down a narrow alleyway, the same alley where we had encountered the creature years ago. The plant's groaning echoed in the distance, and the ground trembled beneath our feet. Every step felt like a countdown, like we were walking into something terrible. Then we heard it, a scream. It was my mum's voice, and it came from the next street over. My heart skipped a beat, and Toby grabbed my hand. We quickened our pace, but as we got closer, we heard another sound, the clicking noise, the same clicking we had heard that night when the creature came after us. The noise was getting louder, and I felt my stomach drop. The creature was back. Toby squeezed my hand. "It's okay," I lied again, but the fear in my voice gave me away. The clicking grew closer, and the alley felt like it was closing in on us. We were trapped, just like before. Then the black tar started to appear, seeping along the ground. It moved fast, bubbling and hissing as it spread toward us. The creature was close now. I could hear it screech, see its twisted body coming into view. The same horrible, nightmarish figure we had barely escaped from. I could see the tar beginning to burn the ground where it touched, just like it had burned my legs all those years ago. Panic surged through me. The creature's arms stretched out from the tar, long and thin, reaching toward us. Its face twisted in agony as it let out another screech, making the air around us feel heavy and thick with smoke. For a moment, as the tar shifted, I saw something underneath it, something almost human. A hand, raw and exposed, struggling beneath the tar. The creature's body twisted violently, and its back was visible for just a second. My eyes locked onto a scar, a large, rectangular scar on its shoulder. It looked familiar, too familiar. I gasped, my mind racing. The scar. It was the same scar Mr. Grieg had on his shoulder before he disappeared. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. This thing, this creature, had once been Mr. Grieg. Toby saw it too. I could tell by the look on his face. He had known all this time, and now we were facing the same thing again. The creature's screech pulled me back to the moment. It was getting closer, and the tar was creeping toward our feet. We were running out of time. Toby looked at me, his eyes filled with a mix of fear and determination. "You'll be okay, Charlie," he said, his voice soft but steady. Then, before I could stop him, he let go of my hand and ran straight toward the creature. "Toby, no!" I screamed, but it was too late. He darted past the creature, drawing its attention away from me. The creature twisted around, its eyes locking onto Toby. It let out a horrible, gut-wrenching screech and lunged after him. Toby kept running, leading the creature away from the alley and into the dark streets. I stood frozen, my heart pounding in my chest, watching as Toby disappeared with the creature close behind him. The tar began to recede, pulled along with the creature as it chased Toby. The alley was empty now, the ground scorched and steaming where the tar had touched it. I wanted to run after Toby to help him, but my legs wouldn't move. I was too scared, too shocked. I knew what Toby had done. He had sacrificed himself to save me, just like Mr. Grieg had sacrificed himself that night years ago. I ran back home, my chest tight with fear and guilt. My mum was still out there, but I couldn't think straight. All I could think about was Toby. When I reached my house, I burst through the door, tears streaming down my face. My dad stood in the hallway looking lost and empty. I wanted to tell him what had happened, to scream that Toby was gone, but no words came out. The days that followed were a blur. My mum eventually returned, shaken but unharmed. But Toby didn't. He was gone, just like his dad. No one talked about it, and life in the town went on as if nothing had happened. But I couldn't forget. The memory of that night stayed with me, haunting my every thought. Years passed, and the scars on my legs faded, but the pain inside never did. I often found myself wondering what happened to Toby. Did he become like the creature too? Or did he somehow escape? I would never know for sure, but one thing was clear. The plant, the town, and the thing that had taken Mr. Grieg and Toby were all connected. And now, every time I hear the distant groaning of the plant, I remember that night. I remember the sacrifice Toby made to save me. And I will never forget the scar on the creature's shoulder, the one that looked so much like the one Mr. Grieg had.